Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? Today with the new S-Force list, because we have received a new solo gate, and the new solo gate came with free cards. Konami, thank you. I still don't understand why some of the cards then would be like a super rare, like Retroactive, because if you get them for free anyway, what difference does it really make? Maybe it has to do with these legacy packs and whatnot. Don't really have to care, because we do get S-Force Retroactive for free in the solo mission. You just have to do the start as well. You don't even have to get through the gates or anything, so it's very, very easy to pick up. So do not spend any crafting material on this card, because this card is free. And how does this deck fare? What does this deck do now? Will we have much of an improvement, or is it basically kind of the same as before, just a tiny bit more consistent? And I'd say it's kind of more the latter, because, well, we still lack the Link 1, because for some reason this wasn't included in here, even though I think it came out at the same time as the Retroactive and the other one. I'm not 100% sure on that one though, but I thought it would also come out, and that is why I kind of prepared for it. And then when I saw which cards are out now, I was like, oops. So I had to come up with a new list on spot that focuses a bit more on the actual S-Force playstyle, doesn't incorporate the Link 1 that we're still missing. It is what it is. I think I still came up with a list that is fairly playable, although I feel like the deck still has some form of consistency issues. It's usually the same as any other kind of deck that has the issue between, well, you have low level monsters and you have high level monsters, because if you draw a hand with like high level monsters but you cannot summon any of them, then you will be sitting on bricks, and this deck has plenty of them, but we have new ways to summon them out of the hand now, which is, for example, S-Force Retroactive, because if a monster you control would be used for a linked monster, well, that doesn't matter, you can use this as a link material from your hand, which is not too bad, helps you getting into your Link 3 a bit more, so the Link 3 becomes a bit more important than it used to be. But the effect that I wanted to talk about is the quick effect during the main phase, any main phase for that matter, your opponents as well. You can return this card to the hand, and if you do, special summon one level 2 or higher S-Force monster from your hand, so every S-Force monster but itself. And then if an S-Force monster you control would banish a card from your hand to activate its effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. So basically the same second effect, or third effect in that case, as the trap card. So very, very nice card. Attack stats not too good, and you don't want to be playing 1-for-1 to get this out of the deck, because then you lose monsters in your hand, and that is technically all this card does. So yeah, not really that necessary to run any of this, but yeah, the effect is quite nice. It is somewhat of a different version of Edge Razor, but this one gets you back to your hand, so you don't actually establish a board, but you can use it during your opponent's turn, so it helps you with the whole column stuff, because this deck focuses very much on columns. If you've never played S-Force before, then you will see this with the next effects. It really matters in what column your monsters are and in what column your opponent's monsters are. We have the playmaker of this deck, S-Force Rappa, Chiyomaru. No idea how to pronounce this card's name. I hope this was at least somewhat okay. But with this one, each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters can only attack that monster for attacks. And with that monster, it means the one that it faces in the column, so it can only attack these ones. Unless there's none in the column, then it obviously can attack anything. But the important effect for this one is you can banish one S-Force card from your hand, return this card to the hand, and if you do, special summon one S-Force monster from your deck. Sadly, in defense position, would have been a bit better if you could decide what it is, because during your opponent's turn, this effect would be a lot nicer, because some of the attack stats work out better if you actually summon the monsters in attack. Stuff like Pla-Tina, for example, can be a bit better that way, but it is what it is. Still a very neat card. You can already see all the S-Force monsters basically have this effect that you can banish one S-Force card from your hand and then do something. The problem with this is you obviously use a lot of resources then, because if you banish stuff from your hand, you don't have that card in hand anymore, so you play with a lot smaller hand, and the deck tries to circumvent this a bit with Retroactive's effect, or with the trap card second effect, that you can use them from the graveyard as well, and so on and so on, but you will still feel that banish from your hand hitting your consistency or hitting your plays a lot of the time, because you do lose out on certain cards. I mean, you get a card with this, so it kind of is a trade-off with this one specific one. With this one, it's not too bad because it adds itself to the hand, so you don't lose out on card advantage. But yeah, The other ones will be a bit different from time to time. 1 Ash Blossom, I already say this here, 1 Infinite Impermanence, and 1 Solemn Judgment. I don't count them towards the Ultra account because they will be coming in the Master Pack bundles, and so it's basically for free, so I'd like to include one of each of those ones. If you want to play other hand traps, obviously, stuff like Dimension Shifter is very nice in here. Ghost Bell is okay right now, DD Crow is okay right now, Maxi is always a decent card to play as well, so this is stuff that you can be playing instead. I'll be talking about that in a second. I decided to run 1 S-Force Orrafist still, because technically, if you have enough resources, this can be a disruption during your opponent's turn, because you can summon it out with Chiyomaru, and there's a card that summons Chiyomaru during your opponent's turn from the deck, so there's that, so you can technically turn this into this, but both cards need you to banish one of the S-Force cards from your hand, and yeah, that can be a very, very, very expensive disruption for the fact that's like a 10-year Berserker kind of effect, so that's that. And the effect, your opponent cannot target any of their monsters in the same column as one of the S-Force monsters with card effects. You think any monsters? No, any of their monsters. Keep that one in mind. Can be helpful, sometimes that's a thing, but yeah, I don't know, against equipped decks maybe. It did come in handy like one single time, but other than that, this effect doesn't really matter. The effect, what matters is when a monster effect your opponent controls is activated, then you can banish 1 S-Force card and then destroy that monster. So it's not terrible. It helps you with the Edge Razor to go to rank 4, so it's not a bad card either. So you could be running stuff like Baguska if you wanted to. Just like this one in here at 1, it's a level 4 normal summon that still does something. And the monster doesn't even have to be in the same column at least. So this card works with that as well. So we have, I don't know, we have like some form of disruption in this card, but you can cut this if you feel like it does nothing for you and it's just very, very expensive for you to play. We have S-Force Edge Razor, another card that gets stuff out from your hand, but this card advances your board state because it stays on board and it's not like a retroactive that goes back to your hand, but obviously this isn't a quick effect and this is on summon, and it has a neat other effect that each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters cannot be used as a material for the link summon of a link 3 or higher monster. So if you have a good board presence, your opponent will find it hard to go into any link 3s at all. We have S-Force Gravitino, a very, very important card, but here it's already where it starts, level 5. Oof, very annoying, and you don't have that many ways to special summon monsters anyway, so there is that. And this card's effect, very important, each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of the S-Force monsters is banished when it leaves the field. So even if you give it back to the hand or whatnot, then this card banishes it instead if it was in the same column. And one of the other important effects, if this card is normal special summon, you can add 1 S-Force card from your deck to your hand. Most of the time it will be your trap card, but there are definitely other options. Very important card, especially since you have another card now that can summon it from your hand. I feel like this card is at definitely 3 off because it gains you some resources and it's not too hard to summon anymore. We have Pla-Tina, a card that special summons an S-Force monster from your banished zone, which is quite nice, and also lowers the monster attack points of your opponent's monsters are in the same column as your S-Force monsters by 600. I wish I was 800, but it is what it is in the end. Sometimes it comes handy, but the attack stats usually don't matter too much because you still will have a hard time getting over 3000 attack point monsters with it, and so on and so on and so on. A bit difficult, but we have some shenanigans where it could come in handy because we have the new card, the new toy for the S-Force. We have Lapcewell, don't know how to pronounce it, but this has 2400 attack. So if the opponent's 3000 attack point monster is lowered by 600 attack points, you can crash into it. Wow. Wish this also had 2500 attack points, but it is what it is. Sometimes these stats do actually matter. And if this card is special summon, it's basically like Pla-Tina, but it can special summon 1 S-Force monster from your graveyard. Technically, it can summon a link monster, but it's not as good because the effect kind of wants you to point at certain zones, and then it doesn't really work that much anymore once you summon your link monster in your main monster zone. It just is what it is. And the better effect of this one is you can banish an S-Force card from your hand, destroy all of your opponent's monsters in the same column as your S-Force monsters. Very nice going second, very nice in the grind game. Overall, a neat effect. The only problem with summoning stuff on the graveyard with this one is you do play things like Dimensional Fissure, so sometimes you don't have any monsters in your graveyard to summon, and it's a level 6, so not that easy to get out of your hand. Reinforcement of the army, because we have Retroactive and the most important one, Rappa Chiyomaru, and we can search it with it. Terraforming, I did decide to put it in this time. In my original deck profile before the support came out, I didn't include Terraforming, but I thought, what's one more ultra rare that most people will have, and that is very, very useful in general with most of different field spell decks. So yes, include this one just to make it a little bit more consistent, to have some Ash Blossom bait in here. Consistency is key with this deck, and that is why we also run Pot of Prosperity. Makes it harder to OTK your opponent, but since this is mainly played as a control kind of variant, it doesn't really matter that much. Anyway, we have the field spell. The field spell searches you one S-Force monster from your deck to your hand when it's activated, and it has an, I want to say, neat effect when it comes to battling, because it kind of can keep your resources from time to time. When an opponent's monster declares an attack on the S-Force monster in the same column, you can activate the effect. The monster you control cannot be destroyed by a battle, so you have some synergy with the Rappa Chiyomaru effect as well, so your opponent can't attack over certain things and you can keep them then, which can be somewhat helpful from time to time. Resources are everything in this deck, so it can come in handy. We have Dimensional Fissure, mainly because I want to say this deck doesn't care about the graveyard, but it kind of does, like somewhat, especially since the second effect of Retroactive is in here, and Dimensional Fissure sends every card monster to the graveyard, not unlike other kind of floodgates like that, like Herald, where it's only from, I think, deck or a hand, or deck or field or something, whatever, but this one sends all of them. So yeah, bit annoying from time to time, but the meta is like this right now, so this one really, really helps you, and it doesn't hinder your plays all that much in comparison to other decks. So very, very nice floodgate. But if the meta at one point shifts and you don't want this anymore, there's plenty of cards that you could be running instead. In general, you should be probably running stuff like Evenly Matched, things like There Can Be Only One. Very, very nice floodgate for this deck. If you want to focus on a more go second kind of variant, or more like, well, you can do both kind of variant, you still want to keep it budget, then Book of Moon is a good card to be running in here because it does disrupt certain things. You can now be running Mask Change too, and to go into Dark Law, because this deck has quite a lot of dark monsters, but I feel like the discard is a bit annoying because this deck already struggles with resources, and in the end it's not a real replacement for Dimensional Fissure because it does the exact same thing. So if the meta works with this one, then might as well play Dimensional Fissure in this deck. But obviously you can also, if you want to go for a more go first variant and want to keep it cheap, triple Compulsory is a thing. You can stock up on the Lost Winds. There's so many things. Compulse is especially very nice because in combination with Gravitino, you actually banish the cards then, so just targeting banish without any repercussions, very, very nice. Then we have Forbidden Chalice, also a card that you can swap out by running stuff like Max C, for example, Dimensional Shifter, and so on. But this is just the budget option of a card that's okay going first, okay going second. If you want to knuckle down on the going first thing, you can just fill this up with like good stuff traps that are better than this one. Like I said already, Compulse, and so on and so on and so on. There's plenty of traps that you can be running. If you want to have a deck that kind of at least can go second, I know go second decks on a budget are very hard because you do need certain hand traps and stuff, but that card does stuff going second as well. One S-Force Showdown, mainly because it's searchable. You can do some plays with it. Special summon one monster from your hand can be helpful because of the whole column placement, and also targeting one S-Force monster in your graveyard and adding to your hand can, I think, help you to recycle your one-off Justify, so that's not too bad then in a budget variant, so you don't have to run multiple of this. You can just technically tuck it back into your extra deck. One Compulse, just to have some more disruptions, some stuff that's a bit different. You can technically take out all the Lost Winds, just run triple Compulse if you want to. I just feel like Lost Wind is nice because this deck is very grindy and struggles with your opponent's monsters having high attack stats. So this one, in my opinion, does a bit more than Compulse in a version that aims to not just solely go first, but Compulse obviously also has its very, very, very neat moments in combination with Gravitino. We have Reinforced Truth, cards that I don't like running, but it does make sense because you can either go into Retroactive or you can go into the Rappa Chiyomaru during your opponent's turn, and then you can use their quick effects to at least get something out. It's not the best kind of way of consistency, but is some way of consistency because you need either one of those two to actually do stuff, although Rappa is still a lot better than Retroactive in my personal opinion. Lost Wind, very nice card, already talked about this one. We have S-Force Specimen, a card that actually can summon stuff back from your banished zone as well, so that can be quite nice, and also it can shift some things. If this card's in a graveyard, you can banish it, it can shift some stuff, and it's searchable, so I really like this card. One can be nice to disrupt your opponent with the whole column play, because you have multiple ways with this one to manipulate what column your monsters are in, and that is somewhat important in this deck. Then we have the very, very neat card. Sadly, you do need 3 of it. You can try out 2 if you want to at the start, because then the deck is like dirt cheap and you're absolutely fine. I would suggest playing 3, but if you only have 2, it should still be fine because it's searchable and you can fill it up with other power traps, then you would be okay. But 3 is definitely the best one, because this one is basically Compulse, but for multiple monsters. You can target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of S-Force monsters you control with different names, and then return them to the hand. So that is very, very neat. Also, this card can be banished from the graveyard instead for using as material of the effects of your S-Force monsters. So we have that one. Solemn Judgment maybe in here to stop like power spells that would destroy your back row, and yeah, not all that nice. Obviously, you can also be playing stuff like Call to the Grave because hand traps are very annoying as well. I decided to run 1 Herald of Pure Light, mainly to recycle stuff like the extra deck monster, but you can cut this as soon as possible. This card does basically nothing for the deck specifically. 1 Evilswarm Nightmare, because technically it is possible to get 2 Edge Razors out, not with its own effect, because you cannot summon itself. Why that is, don't know, because the effect is once per turn anyway, but maybe they wanted you to stop from going into rank 4s all that much, I don't know. But this card can still come up, and unless you have better options, this isn't too bad. Heartland Draco is something that you could be playing with Zeus if you want to, and just in general, going for 2000 attack points finish might sometimes be handy if you can attack directly. Also a card you can switch out for good link stuff or good rank 4 stuff. We have Rhapsody, a card that actually works at the moment because you get stuff out of the opponent's graveyard. Gagaga Samurai, because this card can help you facilitate an OTK, because the attack of this is higher than of those two, but usually you don't really want to go into an extra deck stuff anyway, because the extra deck doesn't really matter for this one, because the column stuff is so important. So you want to keep as many of the S-Force monsters on board as possible. So this whole extra deck is just in here basically for Plot Prosperity and for the occasional thing where you need it, stuff like Asophiel to clear something off the board that otherwise you cannot clear. We have Force Focus because we do now have 2 level 6s that aren't too hard to get out with the whole banish and special summon from deck and special summon from hand. So some of the level 6s just make a bit of sense, but they're not that crazy in this deck. Obviously you can play good ones. You could consider playing Wave High King Caesar if you played 2 of this one, because this one is a feat monster, so technically it's possible, and the effect of this card is quite strong, so something to keep in mind, I guess, question mark. Palzomino, because of the whole we have different levels and things, so that works. We have Geonator Transverser, just a nice budget card to deal with some of your opponent's iffy things if they do place the monsters where they shouldn't be placing them, and you can kind of force that a bit in this variant, so there's that. We have Decode Talker, budget card. Power Code Talker helps you getting over certain monsters that you cannot get over otherwise, and since this deck can flood the board a bit, it's not too hard to go into this one. We have Justify, a very, very nice card. You only need 3 effect monsters, including an S-Force monster, so technically you can be playing other stuff, which is where I wanted to talk about. Iron Dragon Tiamaton. This card can be played, and since it's a quick effect, you can special summon it during your opponent's turn. Very, very neat. If this card special summon, destroy all other cards in their cards column. Bit annoying because you will be destroying your own cards a lot of the time as well, so it has ups and downs. It can be quite neat. It's a dark monster, level 4 monster, so technically it helps you going into things like Evilswarm Nightmare. It's not an expensive card. You could try it out. I have seen play of this card, and I have tried it myself. There were situations where it's really good, and then there's situations where it's really bad, but since you have so many ways of manipulating the board state, it isn't too hard to get this effect, card's effect off, and yeah, you can try it out if you want to. Another card I wanted to talk about, S-Force Tag, because you haven't seen it in this profile here, and I felt like we do not need to run it. Yes, the effect is quite nice. If you read it, it's like, oh, crazy, doing main phase, and then you say, oh, doing your main phase. Just main phase and doing your opponent's monster cannot activate the effects of monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters, so it doesn't even negate it. It can special summon itself from your hand even during your opponent's turn, so that is somewhat nice. But for the fact that it's super rare, you can play it, swap it out for one Pla-Tina if you want to, but you do not need to play it at all. I'm talking about Pla-Tina, kind of a card that you could cut down to 1 if you want to, if you want to be playing some other stuff and you feel like you're consistent enough, then 1 Pla-Tina also does it, but I felt like 2 was a tiny bit better. For the Link monster, it's easier to go into now. Its effects are decent. Yeah, you kind of do have to run it at 1 these days, but the deck also does a lot without the Link monster anyway. We have Raster Liger, a very, very nice budget card that comes in the starter deck. Access Decode Talker budget, basically, and especially with things like S-Force Justify in the graveyard, you can boost your monster by 2600 attack then, which is quite nice, and then you can pop some cards potentially, so there is that. Other cards you could be running, technically you can be playing Pot of Extravagance. If you completely do not care about the extra deck, then one extra card can be nice, but like I said, some of the extra deck things are somewhat important. Other extra deck monsters, Baguska is helpful, Lingoribo you can play because this is a Cybers monster, all the Nightmares do things, Appaloosa could be doing stuff, Access Decode Talker, Goddess of the Underworld, IP Masquerena, you know the drill, all of the good cards. And one card that is very strong in the meta right now, evenly matched, can do quite a bit. Let's move to the rating section. Alright, let's talk about this deck. How good does it fare compared to other budget decks and so on. Let's look at the power level of this deck, the strength of this deck, and I would say a pretty mediocre 3 out of 5. It's nothing too crazy, but it can do some plays that can catch out your opponent. It has some potential to go up against certain meta decks from time to time, but also it lacks, well, the resource game that some other decks have, and it also lacks the attack power to finish out games consistently. There are ways to circumvent this, but it's not the best and it's not the worst. It's pretty mid deck. You can play it at a fairly decent level if you upgrade it with certain power cards, but a lot of the time the stuff that would carry you to wins in high ranked kind of duels are the power cards that you then put in, and not necessarily S-Force. But S-Force isn't as bad as it used to be, and it wasn't that bad to begin with, so like a very solid 3. You could even argue it's a high 3, but I don't want to go any higher than that with it. Prove me wrong, maybe you make it to Diamond with this kind of list, but I felt like it did some nice stuff and it did some bad stuff, and also it isn't so easy to play because you have lots of options now, and it needs some thinking work to make this deck be as good as possible. When it comes to consistency, I want to give it a, well, kind of a 2 out of 5, but a very high 2 out of 5. The problem with consistency is you do play the high level monsters and you will end up with hands that are just disruptions and no monsters you can summon, or you will have some hands where you're stuck with the high level monsters and cannot do much. And since the deck kind of relies on you having Chiyomaru on board, because this is mainly a playmaker where you get anything else out of the deck, it has a very clear choke point. And also, you don't always get into these cards, so you have these kind of issues. So I would say consistency-wise, a very high 2 out of 5, but didn't feel like in comparison to other decks, I wanted to go with a 3 out of 5. So it is what it is. In terms of budget value, the deck is dirt cheap, so I would say it's a very low 4 out of 5. Point is that why I take away some points is obviously it's not the strongest of all decks, so of course the cheaper a deck is, usually the worse it gets, and it's kind of the same with this one. The fact that it's so cheap also means it's not that great, but for the fact how cheap it is, you only need 1 or 2 ultra rares basically, and only like 6 or 7 super rares that you actually need to craft. The deck is fairly decent, fairly competent. The only issue with it then is you cannot really splash this engine into anything, because like you see, you have to banish S-Force cards from your hand, and obviously the less S-Force cards you play, the less impact this will have, because you will have more dead hands, and then it doesn't do all that much. So could say a very high 3 out of 5, or could say a very low 4 out of 5, because the deck is decent and it's very, very cheap in comparison to most other decks, but also it isn't splashable and it's not like Sprite or anything, so it's not that good. So I would say a low 4 out of 5, but take it with a grain of salt. And for the replay, I kind of wanted to showcase this deck, not too many replays this time, because I might do the whole 10 or 5 rankings in a row. Although the views I get on this one aren't that good, so I'm not sure if I should actually continue the series. Let me know if you made it that far. Should I continue the series where I do play this deck in consecutive ranked duels, or should I just stop it? Because I feel like not a lot of people would want to watch it, because the videos tend to be quite long, and since it's not even live duels, it's a lot of effort for me to first of all do the duels, then record it, then edit it, and then also produce it, and probably one of the ones that take the most effort making it. So I thought, if people aren't really interested in it, then I'll just do some quick replay videos, put some copyright free music under it, and call it a day. So we will see, let me know. But this one I wanted to show off S-Force, and we go first. We have a decent hand, we have 3 disruptions plus some of the play starters, so not a bad hand. Obviously I'm not going to show you a hand that completely breaks, you will see that yourself if you try out the deck. We go for reinforcement of the army first. If this card gets negated, then we are kind of screwed, because retroactive does nothing by itself. You can already see the issues from time to time, but most people wouldn't ash a reinforcement these days. Don't know, very hard to say, but they could still have a disruption for Chiyomaru, and then we are still a bit screwed. We go for this card, banish Retroactive, a bit annoying, but then we summon out our Gravitino, and now we have 4 disruptions and some plays for the next turn because we have Chase, and Chase can be banished from the graveyard. So all in all, not a terrible hand. I decided to keep Forbidden Chalice in hand here just in case they do put up stuff and can't finish the game. Then we still have something that responds to their monster on board, and also if they have a blowout card, I didn't want to use or lose all of my 4 disruptions because usually I would have lost them anyway. But yeah, technically if they play a slower deck, then I could have a chance by using Forbidden Chalice and the effect of S-Force Chase in the graveyard with Chiyomaru. So this is my reasoning for keeping Forbidden Chalice in the hand. Obviously you can just go all in and set this one as well, but I thought 3 disruptions should deal with most decks at least. Might have been greedy a bit, but we will see. We're playing against Cyberdarks again. I always, when I want to test decks, run into Cyberdarks, and it's okay because the deck is like fairly decent because they don't play like the just structure deck variants. They play the full deck, I want to say, call it. So it was fine. I wanted to showcase this because they have enough plays, so it's not a terrible deck to go up against, but it's also not tier limits at the moment, and I don't really want to showcase any of that anyway anymore. They use Cybernetic Horizon here. I could have used Infinite Impermanence on Cyberdark Chimera to stop this search from going off as well, so they have a bit less cards in hand. Then the thing is, I didn't want to use the only negate I have for this one yet, because if they have some other way of getting this card on board again and then get the effect through, they get the power bond combination with fusion summoning from the graveyard, and didn't want this to happen. So I kept it and waited for them to use the effect of Chimera, so they cannot fuse with materials from the graveyard, because this deck likes doing that, and they can put up quite annoying cards from time to time with it. Now they use the effect, discard another Horizon, and this is where I decided to negate the effect here, so they can't use it because I think it's a hard once per turn. And they still have a power bond, but they cannot use monsters from the graveyard, so they just have to go into some Cyber Dragon shenanigans, which isn't too bad, obviously, unless we have more disruptions. They go into a Rampage, and here I decided to use both cards, mainly because of the fact that if I would just use Chase, I would have lost Wind anyway, and if I just used Lost Wind, then this card can just get over my monster on board, and field presence is somewhat important in S-Force, so there was that. So I used Lost Wind first, and then when they started to go to the battle phase, I used Chase as well. So I have this in the graveyard for next turn anyway, so I can use it with Chiyomaru, and also to get rid of that threat on board so I can keep my Gravitino. That is the reasoning behind this one. They get damaged by power bonds, rightfully so, there you go. And we draw into another Chiyomaru, a bit unfortunate. Sometimes too much of something good is still too much. We now special summon Pla-Tina from our deck, then we go into Retroactive, and then with Retroactive I activate the effect to go into Chiyomaru, so I can go into the link monster with using Retroactive from the hand, and I have this now during the opponent's turn. There was probably a different line that you could have done. Getting Gravitino out of the graveyard would have been some kind of way by linking off some stuff, and during the next turn I can technically summon Gravitino from the graveyard, but we are one turn without S-Force Chase now, which can be quite problematic from time to time, but we do have Justify, which isn't as good if you look at it in hindsight, because you play against Cyber Dragons and they can easily get rid of stuff in your extra monster zone, and you will be seeing this eventually. One thing to mention as well, I used the effect of Justify here, so this card gets banished, so they can send another card to the graveyard. But if you wondered if you can attack afterwards, no you cannot, so keep that one in mind. Just a little tidbit if you're a bit new to Yu-Gi-Oh! And this might be coming in handy, because some people might think, oh, I'll just banish the monster, then I can still attack for 2,600. No, you can not. We have then 800 attack points, we have 1 negate, 2 negates, and we have this as some form of disruption or some form of summon stuff out during your opponent's turn, so that's fine. They obviously still have plays, they can get Hertz in, then Hertz counts as Cyber Dragon, and they can, or for this one, Cyber Dragon monster is still fine anyway, so they can go into a Mega Fleet, so our monster is basically instantly gone. There's nothing much I could have done against that, because it would have still counted as a Cyber Dragon monster. So yeah, even if I negated it with the Justify, wouldn't have done anything anyway. So this was a bit of a misplay by my part to even go into Justify, because I should have seen this coming playing in Cyber Dragon. They have another Chimera here. They want to use the effect again. I'm like, nope, you're not using this effect, because this could become really dangerous, because then I can't target some of the monsters. And now here I use the Retroactive, go into Lapcewell, whatever you want to call it, summon stuff from the graveyard to get Gravitino then add stuff from the deck. I go for the field spell because I thought maybe there's a way to finish the game, because they only have 5,100 life points left, so we possibly can't do stuff. We lose the monster here sadly, but we still have one monster on board that can technically pop the whole board, something that I should keep in mind here. Problem is we have a bit of an issue with resources. We have Edge Razor here, summon Chiyomaru, and at this point I could have popped everything, but I still wouldn't have had enough attack stats to actually finish the game here, so a bit problematic, because Chiyomaru only summons stuff in defense position, so we still can't attack during the battle phase. So I decided just go for the Gravitino play, clear up some of the stuff they have on board, and proceed with having a chase for their next turn, and still some negates here, so that should be fine. Still have two monsters here. Some of the monsters get banished. They got to send one card because I didn't have it in the right zones at that time. And we still have an Ash Blossom for if they want to go for the Power Bond thing again. So we would still be fine here. Obviously, you can play this differently depending on what you want to achieve. They drew into their card that actually does start Harpies Feather Duster, the card I was afraid of earlier, but since they only have one card left in hand, how good can that be? What can it do? I still have Ash Blossom here, so it shouldn't be too good. They have one Cyber Dragon, they clear out some more monsters. I don't know if it would make more sense to clear this one or this one for them. Doesn't really matter here anyway, because I still have the trap cards in grave, and I can go into the effect of Chiyomaru again, and I draw into another one. At this point I wanted to draw anything but that, but is what it is. Go into Pla-Tina here, get Retroactive back. Could have gotten well, nothing much back, because I could have gotten another Chiyomaru back, but technically I can just go into it with Retroactive during my turn anyway, so I thought Retroactive was the better choice here. I decided to go over the Cyber Dragon, and now it's kind of the same thing as always. It's a grind game. We have one Ash Blossom, so any good search they have we don't really care about, and that is exactly the case. They use Cyber Emergency, and the second effect doesn't matter because they don't have a card to discard, so we can negate this one and then finish the game up on the next turn, because there's nothing that they can be doing anyway, because they don't have anything in their graveyard as well. So you can see the deck is quite grindy. You have a bit of a hard time finishing out games if you don't load your extra deck with certain other cards like Access, Decode Talker and whatnots. You have a bit of an issue from time to time to finish games. Sadly, also with only one Justify in your extra deck, sometimes you lose out on certain things, but also you can see how Justify isn't always justified as a play. Sometimes you want to be doing some other stuff, sometimes you want to be keeping the S-Force things on board and want to manipulate around a little bit with the columns. Also, you saw how important Gravitino is, because this card searches your main disruption, and if you sometimes don't get into this can be problematic. But technically with Chiyomaru you always have a way of going into it, but you ending on just Gravitino plus the chase isn't great, because obviously you just bounce one monster and you might as well just play a triple evacuation device anyway. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.